The radio started transmitting before we finished clearing the sand from the hatch. I remember because none of us had touched the handset yet. No call was made. No channel was selected. Still, the TX indicator lit up in a steady rhythm, as if something below had already decided the timing for us. The hatch had been buried on purpose. Its bolts were intact, the seal dry and unbroken, the kind you expect on equipment meant to stay closed for decades. When we lifted it, warm air came up from the shaft. Not fast, not violent, just enough to carry dust with it. That's when the radio changed pattern. Same interval, same length, repeating without drift. I held the unit at chest level and waited for interference, for bleed, for anything that would explain it. Nothing came through, just the transmission state. Still active, still repeating. We stood there listening to something that wasn't speaking and realizing it didn't need us to. This channel documents frontline accounts like this one. Subscribe for future reports. In 1990, our Recon detachment was tasked with a recovery job that didn't belong in the daily log. The briefing was short. Locate a buried access point in the Great Basin, open it, and retrieve a signal relay module left from an older field program. No names for the program. No map layer for the site. Just coordinates, a time window, and a reminder that the desert keeps secrets because it has room to bury them. We moved at night to avoid attention and heat shimmer. 2 men on the dig, 2 on overwatch beyond the rocks. Standard radios, standard checks, nothing exotic. The hatch was exactly where the grid said it would be, hidden under compacted sand and gravel like someone had backfilled it with intent. The lid still had its factory edges. The bolts weren't stripped. No fresh tool marks. That was the first wrong detail. It looked sealed, not abandoned. The first thing we did was treat it like equipment, not like a story. We logged the grid, photographed the lid, and checked the immediate area for anything that didn't belong. Fresh tracks, recent digging, trash, brass. The Great Basin was quiet in that way. Deserts can be quiet, like the silence has weight. Our overwatch pair stayed up on a low rise, silhouettes against the darker line of hills, scanning with night optics and listening for vehicles that weren't ours. At the hatch, we worked in short, practiced motions. The lid was heavier than it looked, and the hinge protested like it hadn't moved in years. When it finally broke free, there was no rush of air, just a slow, warm exhale from below that carried fine dust. It should have smelled like damp concrete or rust. It didn't smell like anything. That bothered me more than it should have. The radio was still showing TX. I reset it, powered it down, checked the handset connection. Nothing changed. The indicator returned on its own, in that same steady rhythm, on for a beat, off for a beat, like a metronome. If it was interference, it was the cleanest interference I'd ever seen. If it was a stuck switch, it was the smartest stuck switch I'd ever seen. We tried the simple test. Step away from the hatch. The TX rhythm held. Step back to the rim. The rhythm shortened by a fraction, subtle enough you could miss it if you weren't counting. I looked at my buddy and didn't say what we were both thinking, that it felt responsive. We ran a cable light down the shaft and let it hang just above the first landing. The cone of light didn't show a ladder, only a smooth concrete cylinder with a maintenance ring and bolt holes, like the top of a sealed utility access. The walls were dry, too dry. Dust clung in thin sheets that should have fallen years ago. When the light swung, the dust moved in a way that didn't match the motion. Not a swirl, not a draft. More like something heavy had passed through the air below and displaced it. The dust drifted straight down, as if pulled. I called up to Overwatch for a check. Their reply came back normal. No contacts, no movement. Then, 2 seconds later, my radio went TX again. Harder this time. Longer on, shorter off. The pattern tightened. The moment I raised the handset closer to my mouth, it tightened again. We weren't receiving anything. We weren't hearing anyone. But the set behaved like it was in the middle of a transmission. We did what recon teams do when something doesn't fit. We narrowed variables. 1 man stayed at the rim with the radio. 1 man moved 10 meters out, then 20, then 30. Watching the TX rhythm. Overwatch stayed fixed. I stayed with the light, watching the shaft. Every time the man on the rim shifted his boots on the gravel, the TX pulse changed by a hair, then returned to baseline, like a device recalibrating. And then we got the first physical confirmation that we weren't alone in the scenario. A small stone on the inner lip of the hatch rolled, slow and deliberate, against the slope. No wind, no vibration from vehicles. It just moved, paused, and moved again until it dropped into the shaft. We listened for it to hit the bottom. It didn't. The sound should have been immediate. Stone on concrete, a few echoes, done. Instead, we heard a soft tap much later, like it landed on something that wasn't concrete, something that gave. We froze in that posture soldiers learn early, still enough to hear your own equipment settle. The flashlight beam remained fixed on the inner wall. Dust drifted in thin strands. The radio kept pulsing TX like a heartbeat. Overwatch whispered over comms that they could see our beam moving, but none of our bodies were moving. They asked if we were signaling. We said negative. That's when I noticed the shadow. Not a figure, not a shape you could draw. Just a broad, soft edge darkening that slid across the concrete wall inside the shaft, cutting through the beam for half a second, and then disappearing into the lower darkness. It wasn't sharp like a person stepping between light and wall. It was diffuse, like something large moving behind a thin barrier. The man with the radio tightened his grip. The TX pattern shortened again, as if acknowledging the change. We backed off the rim and reset our posture. Nobody wanted to be the first one down. Nobody said it out loud because admitting you didn't want to descend into a hole is the same as admitting the hole has teeth. We attempted the mission anyway, the way command expects. Controlled, measured, documented. We lowered a weighted line to gauge depth. The line fed smoothly for a while, then stopped abruptly at a point that didn't make sense. We pulled it back up and found the weight scraped, not with rock abrasion, but with thin parallel marks, evenly spaced like something had dragged across it. We tried again with a different weight. Same result, different scrape pattern, same spacing. The wall was smooth concrete. There was nothing down there that should be marking metal like that. Then the radio did something it hadn't done yet. The TX indicator stayed on. No pulse, no rhythm, just a steady transmit state that refused to release. The flashlight in the other man's hand dimmed for a fraction of a second, like the battery dropped under load, then recovered. The air at the rim warmed again, and dust rose, not from wind, but from below, as if the shaft was exhaling a second time. Overwatch called out that they were hearing our carrier on their set now, an open transmit with no voice, bleeding across channels it shouldn't reach. They asked who was keying up. None of us answered because we weren't. And because the longer the carrier stayed open, the more it felt like someone else was using our radio the way a hand uses a door handle. Testing, turning, deciding whether to pull. It happened when we tried to do the most basic thing, confirm what was down there without sending a man. We swapped the cable light for a small camera head, the kind with a narrow beam and a hardwired feed. The plan was to drop it slow, stop at the first landing, sweep the walls, and identify the relay housing. If we could see the mounting bracket, we could rig a hook and pull the module without committing a descent. The moment the camera crossed the hatch line, the radio went dead quiet. No TX, no pulse, nothing. For a second, the sudden silence felt like relief. Then the feed stabilized and the shaft wasn't a shaft anymore. The concrete cylinder was still there, but the air inside it looked wrong. Thicker, like heat shimmer without heat. Dust hung in layers, not drifting, not settling. The camera's light cut a narrow tunnel through it and immediately lost its edge, like it was being swallowed. We lowered another meter. The screen flickered once. Not static, not interference. A clean, single blink, like the feed was being shut off and turned back on by someone who knew where the switch was. Overwatch said, very calmly, "Your carrier just came back." I looked down at the radio in my hands. The TX indicator was lit steady again, but now it wasn't cycling. It was holding. I hadn't touched the handset. My thumb wasn't near the push to talk. The set was transmitting anyway, open and silent, as if it wanted the line clear. The camera feed blinked again. When it returned, the light caught something on the wall, a set of marks. thin, parallel lines, evenly spaced, running vertically where there shouldn't have been any. The concrete looked shaved, not chipped, like something had passed close enough to score it without striking. Then the dust moved. Not like wind, not like a draft. It moved as if a large mass displaced it, pushing a slow wave through the air. The wave rolled across the beam, and the wall darkened behind it, not sharply, but with a broad, soft shadow that filled the frame edge to edge. For half a second, the camera's auto exposure compensated as if the light source had been blocked by something very close. The men around me didn't speak. You could hear fabric and straps tightening as hands adjusted grips without anyone meaning to. The shadow slid past and the feed cut out completely. At the same instant, the radio's open transmit changed. Still no voice, but the carrier tone shifted into a pulsed pattern again, faster than before, like the device had found a tempo it liked. The hatch exhaled warm air a third time, and grit lifted off the rim in a clean line, rising toward us. That was the first undeniable contact. Not a sighting, not a shape we could describe, but a coordinated response. Our camera blinded, our radio taken, our space measured, like something below had acknowledged us and decided to answer without ever speaking. We did not go down the hatch. That decision wasn't heroic. It wasn't caution. It was arithmetic. We had a silent transmitter we couldn't control, a camera feed that could be shut off at will, and a space below that responded to our movements like it understood the rules better than we did. Whatever the relay was supposed to be, it wasn't just hardware anymore, if it ever had been. Overwatch reported a new problem as we backed away. Their radios were carrying our open transmit even with our set powered down. The carrier was there like a stain, jumping between channels in a pattern that repeated every minute and then reset. Exactly, without drift. They said it sounded like a hand on a mic, waiting. We tried to bury the hatch the way we found it, working fast, keeping our lights low. The moment the lid settled into place, the TX pulse tightened, faster and harder, as if the act of sealing it triggered something below. Sand at the edges vibrated. Not enough to throw dust into the air, just enough to make the grains walk. Then the ground under the lid shifted by a fraction, more felt than seen, and the warm air stopped. The desert became cold again. The radios went quiet for 5 seconds. In those 5 seconds, nobody moved. When the transmit returned, it was weaker, but it was still there. The pattern never stopped. It just learned how to follow at a distance. We pulled out before dawn, leaving the site looking untouched. Back at the temporary command post, we laid the camera head, cable, and radio on a folding table and watched the TX indicator blink without power. A technician later told us it was impossible. Our debrief was shorter than the briefing. We were ordered to write it as equipment fault, environmental anomaly, probable interference. Then a captain with no unit patch took our notes and told us flatly that the program had ended years ago and that the hatch did not exist. That night, every radio in the tent line keyed up at once. Open transmit, no voice, holding the channel like something was still waiting for a reply. 2 weeks later, I was told the recovery mission had been resolved and that no further action was required. The paperwork vanished from our system. The coordinates were replaced with a blank grid reference and a note that the area was restricted for ordnance remediation, which was a lie. We saw no signs of it. I kept one detail to myself: the pattern. Even off the site, even after the radios were swapped and reissued, I would sometimes catch a steady TX pulse late at night, clean, repeating, and silent, on a channel nobody in our unit used. It always ended the same way: 5 seconds of dead air, like something had waited, then decided to stop listening.